Hi, I'm Tristan, and this is Thinking About Politics. So today we are taking yet another look into the false claims of fraud regarding the 2020 election in Arizona. We've checked out 3 audits thus far. We've looked at 1 court case, and we've been able to show that thus far the only fraudulent thing about the 2020 presidential election in Arizona are the allegations of fraud themselves. But, just because we like kicking a dead horse around here, we decided to take a look at yet another one of these cases filed by partisan activists trying to muddy the water by attacking the integrity of the 2020 election without any real evidence of fraud. This is Ward v. Jackson. So like I said, last time we looked at one of these cases, we looked at Bauer v. Ducey. That case was filed by the Trump advisor Sidney Powell on behalf of something like a couple of the Republican electors and county GOP chairs. The claim there was that the Arizona governor, who's a Republican, worked with Democrats and foreign actors to tip the election to Joe Biden fraudulently. And Ward v. Jackson actually came up in that case because one of the many grounds the federal court in that case decided to dismiss was on the grounds of abstention. Now, abstention is where a federal court gives up their jurisdiction to a state court because they're better equipped to manage their own affairs, and a case is moving through already. Multiple opinions might confuse the issue. Well, Ward v. Jackson was that case that provided those abstention grounds. So we're going to take a deep dive into this one and really try to suss out what evidence of fraud is there. Are there any viable or legitimate claims of fraud that can be found? Let's check out the complaint. So the plaintiff is alleging a few issues here, a few tacks in the pie. Remember, the plaintiff's job in a complaint is to show that they've got a potential claim. A claim is a real issue that the law can help them with, like biting into a fruit pie that's full of thumbtacks. That's a great claim. If they don't have a great claim, where law can provide no help at all, the judge can just go ahead and toss those claims. There's no harm there. There's nothing law can do to give you any satisfaction. One tack is this. Partisan observers had to stand 10 to 12 feet away, and they weren't allowed to access every area or observe every action that they wanted. Cool. That's 1. 2, they were able to see election workers matching signatures, and these partisan observers in some cases disagreed with those judgments. And it's kind of funny because the complaint takes issue with the fact that these election workers probably don't get enough training in how to verify signatures, but somehow they also think that their own partisan poll observers have this great expertise. It's like the volunteers who want to do this for the public good, they probably don't know what they're doing. Oh, but these partisan observers, they definitely know how to match signatures, right? And they also allege that, it's probably really easy to forge signatures. They don't have evidence of forgery necessarily, but there you go. They also have a real big hunch that a bunch of illegal votes were counted. Now, do they have evidence for this claim? Not at all. But they think if the judge lets them review all of the ballots, they could find the evidence they need to make a claim. And just note for a second that a signature mismatch is a lot different than saying somebody cast an illegal vote on purpose. An allegation that signatures didn't match and a ballot wasn't verified is different than someone coming in and casting a fraudulent vote. That's a totally different animal. And fact of the matter is that by targeting signature verification on mail-in voting this way, these Republicans know that they will disproportionately affect Democratic ballots just by the way we know how people in different parties voted. So based on these allegations, I guess you have to call them, the plaintiff claims that insufficiently verified ballots were potentially allowed to be counted, but that the plaintiff has no way of knowing whether falsely or insufficiently verified ballots were counted. Let's see what the court thought of the evidence. So the Arizona Superior Court judge conducted an evidentiary hearing on December 4th, 2020, and subsequently issued a ruling. First, let's note the legal standards that the judge outlines for us. First is this. The returns of election officials are prima facie correct and free from the imputation of fraud. Prima facie is fancy Latin. Whatever the literal translation means, in this instance, it means that whatever the election officers tell us the results are, that's going to be good enough for the court. Unless you have some reason we shouldn't need to trust them, the fact that the election officer tells us the results is enough evidence for us to take what the results are. Deference to officials doing their official duty? Well, I mean, it goes far. It says that even honest mistakes, gross irregularities, unless they're fraud, or unless they could actually overturn an election, they're probably not enough to void anything. In essence, no court is going to be looking over the shoulder of these election officials and assume that errors and mistakes are intentional fraud without actual evidence of intentional fraud. They're going to assume that errors and mistakes are errors and mistakes. They won't just impute or fill in the blanks. You gotta follow the facts. That's good advice for anybody who's interested in this issue. So all this taken together gives us our first legal standard, the first path to victory our plaintiffs have. They got to allege more than misconduct. They got to allege actual fraud. Their other path to victory is this. Even absent fraud, if enough illegal votes were cast as to potentially shift the election, that would be enough to sustain a claim as well. But again, to be a valid challenge, they need to show that both illegal ballots were cast and that sufficient ballots were cast that could have changed the election outcome. So, what did the judge find? Did the judge find proof of misconduct? Did the judge find proof of fraud? Well, there were certainly mistakes. During this process, there was a review of about 1,600 ballots. Out of those ballots, there were at least 9 errors found. But these errors were split between both candidates. They didn't favor one exclusively. And when you look at what the plaintiffs actually claimed, it's easy to see why the judge really wasn't buying this as a fraud claim. First, the Republican officials here complained that their partisan observers were not given access to all the areas that they wanted and had to stay at a distance of 10 to 12 feet. Well, that one gets dismissed right out of hand. And the reason is that this practice was in place way back in August. If this was the practice back in August and it was a big problem, you should have said something when you realized it was a big problem, not after you lost the election. Because if you file your complaint after the election and you lose, well, it just looks like you got sour grapes. It's the political equivalent of crying, hey, the sun was in my eyes, when you miss the ball on a cloudy day. Something I have a lot of experience with. So the judge says, hey, get out of here with those claims. Second, the Republicans here are claiming that state officials were not skeptical enough when it comes to verification of signatures. But the fact of the matter is that the state of Arizona has a manual for how to verify signatures, and state law manages the conduct of these elections. On top of that, the court also allowed a review of a sampling of ballots to look at the signatures on the outside of these mail-in ballots to see if they matched. And there was no evidence of forgery found there. Whatever irregularities the GOP plaintiffs think they saw here, there was no evidence that the manner in which signatures were being reviewed was designed in a way to favor one candidate over another. So yeah, the judge says that the plaintiffs haven't alleged anything that could possibly be fraud with regards to these signatures. So yeah, no fraud there either. Third is what we call the duplication issue. You see, when ballots come in that are damaged or that the machine can't read it for some reason, a team of volunteers from a couple different political parties, Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians, I think, in Arizona, will look at the ballot and decide whether they can determine the intent of the voter. If they can, they duplicate the ballot and put it through to count. If they can't, they toss it. And again, this is where the court reviewed those 1,600 votes and found 9 errors, cutting both ways. So yeah, there may have been mistakes, as there are in every endeavor undertaken by human beings. But the judge here even takes the plaintiff's numbers and finds that the election was 99.45% accurate. Mistakes were small in number, and they don't show any fraudulent intent at all. So for standard 1, proving misconduct that rises to the level of fraud, court says no dice. Dismissed. Okay, so last chance. Did the plaintiffs credibly allege sufficient illegal votes were cast that could have overturned the election, or at least cast doubt? Well, the judge here says that the evidence did not prove illegal votes, much less enough to affect the outcome of the election. Sorry, guys. Let's wrap this up, shall we? After the Superior Court judge entered her order dismissing this case on December 4th, 2020, GOP plaintiffs appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court. That court issued an order on December 7th on an expedited review, and they unanimously agreed to uphold the trial court's order, saying the challenge fails to present any evidence of misconduct, illegal votes, or that Biden electors did not in fact receive the highest number of votes for office, let alone establish any degree of fraud or sufficient error rate that would undermine the certainty of the election results. So again, we are stuck with a stinker of a case brought by political operatives who can certainly afford lawyers good enough to know that these cases are stinkers. But they are also schooled in the perception politics of the social media age. So why would you insist on bringing a case like this and getting people so worked up over non-existent fraud? But some people might do it to raise money. Some people might do it because they see a political path to power and exciting our baser passions. Some folks want the experiment of democratic self-government to come to an end. Alexander Hamilton once wondered, as a matter of political theory, whether humankind was always doomed to be subject to the arbitrary whims of powerful people, or whether humankind could actually govern their political affairs by reason, whether arbitrary force was always going to win out. I can't help but think that those who are buying into these fraudulent fraud claims, those who continue to buy into it, you're providing an answer, aren't you? Anyway, that's all for me. If you made it this far, why don't you give us a like, or a share, or a subscribe? It would really help our channel grow. You've been great, and I hope to see you again, but until next time, keep thinking.
Now I'm busy with this mule.